What's the loft of a golf club? Let's find out together right now. Welcome back to the McGolf shop and Tools of the Trade Tuesday, which again is now a Wednesday. Lots of stuff happened, is no more than an excuse. However, we talked about length of a club last time, and now we are going to talk about the loft of a golf club. And because it's tools of the trade, we're going to talk about two different tools in order on how to measure the loft. Now, what is loft? Well, just like we talked with the USGA rules when we showed it to you, there's really not a way of measure of loft, okay? However, there are rules of loft and how much you can be one way or the other. Once you get above a certain loft, if grooves start applying, there's all kinds of stuff like that. But there's no way on, like, how do you measure, right? So there are three major groups of clubs that you have to measure. Woods, which I would include hybrids in that. Irons, which I would include wedges with that. And then putters. And they all have unique ways of being measured because of different items. So we're going to talk about a few things. Let me get a driver and we'll start from there. Okay, wood. Wood. Okay. A couple things to know about wood. You have bulge and you have roll. Okay. Bulge is the curve in this direction and roll is the curve in this direction. And what we try to do is measure. So how do you measure something that's not completely straight? Therein lies the question. So if you have something that has a curve on it, and you have something that is very flat, you can see that. See how there's that opening there? Okay, so where do you measure that at? Well, the easiest one is in the middle. So in here, wherever the middle runs through here and the middle runs through here is about the best way you want to set it. Then when you have the club in the gauge, you put this so that you see an equal amount of light on both sides, i.e. the middle of this gauge is hitting the middle of that face. We're going to show you how to do that. Now on irons it's a little different because the face is completely straight. On putters it's a little different because the face is so small. So it takes a little bit of getting used to. So we're going to move you down to the gauge to kind of show you how we're going to use this in the gauge. And then we'll move to our other tool. So let me move you again. We've put our club, our iron in the gauge. And if you can see, I have a middle line that runs right through here, basically the middle of the club. It's a line that runs right through here, basically the middle of the club. So I have it set there. And then what we try to do is put it in its playing position. So what does that mean? Well, if you take two of these and you put it underneath the iron here, iron there, then you know you're in the playing position for in order to measure. Then all you have to do is simply set the gauge right on top of here and pull it so it lays flat against it right there. And then where on this particular gauge, it's where the line and that gauge meet up. In this particular instance, it's 32, which happens to be dead on for that club. Now, in this particular gauge, it also reads a line angle and it's 60.5. But that's how you would read it in this particular model. Now, we'll talk tools here in a minute, but this is what you would call a loft and lie gauge. So let's move on to the wood. Okay, now we're back into the wood. Now you see I've got it, I did it in the same spot. I'm going to adjust it a little bit to get it towards the middle. Alright, and then we put it up here against here. Now from this angle it's a little harder for me to see, but I'm moving it to where it appears to be somewhere in the middle, right about there. So we're looking somewhere about this area right here, and I'm pretty close, and then you come and measure it. Now I'm going to look. Yep, that's pretty close right there. So that's how you would measure loft of this particular club. Now let's move to a putter. Now you just saw us put this in this one in the gauge. Now the real problem here is, if you see, it's really hard to get to see where that's going to be, because there's not a whole lot of gauge to face engagement. There you go. You try and get about as much as you possibly can out of that, right? And that would be measuring that. Now, some of the things to consider when you're using this particular gauge is that I like to try and make sure that this, if you notice, this thing rides up and down. I like to see this in about the middle. That way it allows for adjustments of loft back and forth. So if I loosen it up, see how it moves up and down? So you can do that final tweaking of loft without hitting the bottom of the gauge or getting to the top of the gauge. The other part is it has to be tight into the jig, because if you allow it to kick out up and down, that can certainly change the lie angle, and it'll change the attitude that it sets into the gauge. So that's basically measuring the loft of the club using a golf gauge. Now I'm going to show you the other way. Okay, so what we have here is a loft and lie machine. The reason why I don't call it a gauge is because this machine is specifically designed to do loft and lie adjustments. However, in order to do the adjustments, you've got to be able to know what the loft and lie is, so you have to measure it. Now, unlike the other one where you have to make sure it's in its playing position in a way that you put the two pieces of two pieces of cardboard, i.e. business cards, together so that you have equal distance from the center, and that's in its playing position, and then you measure. This particular model, you want to look down in here and you look for the scoring lines and make sure they're in line with the little measuring bar in there, and then you tighten it down. Okay? Then you bring it in here, and this is what allows it to move a little bit, and what I'm looking for here is to be flat against this, because now this is the gauge. Now that it's flat against here, I can bring this up and make sure that both ends of this gauge touch this, so it can tell me its lie angle here, and then once I have it here and it's locked in, and it tells me here, and this says 33. So as you can see, just like everything else in the world of golf, not everything measures exactly the same way. And so that's the things we got to kind of talk about. Now, this one will not measure a putter. I have another machine for a putter. This one can hold a driver and it will hold fairway woods, but it depends on already knowing the loft, because again, it's for bending. And we'll get to the pluses and minuses when we're just done here, okay? Give me one more minute and we'll look at the putter. Okay, this is my loft and lie machine for putters. And it's specifically designed to hold putters. It has a special clamping mechanism to hold it back this way, whether it be for a blade or a mallet or some of those other more unique designs that are out there. Plus it clamps over the top, so when you have to bend it either one of these ways, that it holds it. Again, it is a loft and lie machine, but again, you have to know how to measure it. So once this is in place, then this piece moves out, and if I'm going right-handed, it's that way. If I'm going left-handed, I'm over here, and it goes through there. So we have it in the two little indentations that are in the back of the pad right here. I put it against that, and then up here it tells me what the lie angle is. And then behind here is yet another gauge, and it tells me what the loft angle is. And based on what I measured, this one's very, very close in this particular instance. Now again, what I can do is I bend it and I can make those changes. So there are a few machines out there that adjust the loft and lie. If I'm going to point up in here and here, there'll be a little eye that shows that. If you go back to my golf mechanic thing I did for the PGA show, you'll understand. So pros and cons of loft and lie. Or I'm sorry, pros and cons of gauges versus machines. All right. Every club designer worth their salt is going to tell you it's got to go into a gauge. got to go a new gauge, because that's the only way to accurately measure the lie angle, the loft angle of that particular head. Now, what I've shown you is a very basic model. They have models that can go into the thousands upon thousands of dollars that are extraordinarily precise. You put them on marble tables, they're very large, their movements are very precise, and where, you know, I was trying to show you finding the center of the club, they have arms that have digital readouts, so all you have to do is move it up, down, and you bring it over, and it hits right where you need to be, and it can tell you all those things in a digital readout with massive accuracy. All right, so it just depends on how technical do you want to be when you measure a golf club. Do you want to spend $10,000 on a gauge that you're going to use to tell somebody, hey, it's 32 degrees, need to bend it a degree, and then you have to go put it in a machine? Or are you the guy that's designing it and going, man, I really need to get this in here for this model in order for the productions to become? So it's machine versus use, right? You don't need a 100-pound hydraulic floor jack for something that you just need to drive a small nail into. That's one of those things. But a basic machine, in order to do some what I would call blueprinting of clubs, then yeah, you know, use that. Particularly as the players get better, the precision gets higher. Okay, that's what I would look at. Now, does it mean you treat any other golfers different? Absolutely not. You could do that. You could spec all those clubs on that particular gauge all day, every day if you wanted to. But if you're into a machine, and what you're doing is you're seeing changes between clubs. Okay, your changes between clubs. So even if that said 32, if my next one said 36, and the next one said 40 and 44 and 48, I know, because that gauge is pretty accurate at that particular point, that I got 4 degrees between there, and I have a very good gapping. I know the lie angle in that set is pretty good to that as well. Once you get used to how you want to do your flowing of measuring your clubs, you have to make that choice. You can use both. I have on occasion, when something just doesn't make sense to me on my machine, then I will go to the gauge. If I'm looking to blueprint clubs, I use the gauge. If I want to be absolutely particular about something, I use the gauge. If I am bending a set of irons to a particular loft and lie angle, I use the machine. All right. If I'm trying to bend a hybrid, or even a driver for that matter, whatever, a wedge, it goes in the gauge. If I'm bending the putter, it goes in, it goes in the machine. This and this same thing goes into the machine as well. So if you're here's my advice point, that if you're making a shop and you're doing it for yourself, and you're a guy that's all about precision and accuracy, go find you a basic gauge and get that in that other piece, the protractor that I showed you, and you will be really close, very, very close, unless you want to be within, you know, you're talking tenths of degrees. Then you're going to have to go digital with the arm, and then you're into the $5,000 to $10,000 range. If you're a guy that is starting this for a shop and you're going to be doing more actual work instead of measuring, then get the machine. All right. So in the show notes, I'm going to put a couple of links in there about where you can find these particular gauges, where you can find these particular machines, and be up to you on how you want to pick it out. So that's measuring loft, and what we would call this is static loft. All right, that's the actual loft of the golf club as it sits in its playing position, and that's how it's measured, and that's what it is in order for it to go through the set. Just did a fitting for a young man, had a 110 mile an hour driver swing, and had a particular driver in here, and had it set down, and when I measured it, it was still 11.5 degrees. So it was pretty, and he couldn't figure out why he was airmailing everything. Well, it was because that particular loft was messed up. Now, so very basic, That's Loft. Those are the tools, so gauges and machines. I'm sure we're going to revisit the Loft and line machines again when we talk about lie angle and when we actually do some adjustments, so don't worry. And in the Fitting Friday, we're going to talk about dynamic loft and how that impacts how far you can hit the ball. So if you really like what you saw and you want to see more of this in the Tools of the Trade Tuesday, which really be Tuesday, then subscribe and hit the like button if you will. And as always, let's see your scores go low.